They always warn you about the bad boys. But what about the mean girls who break your heart and burn you at the stake? The Girl Who Cried Witch. I took a creative writing class in college, and it was not the best experience of my life, but it forced me to write poetry for the first time in a very long time. I also ended up reading my first contemporary poetry books that semester. The Princess Saves Herself in This One by Amanda Lovelace, Milk and Honey by Ruby Carr, We Carry the Sky by Michaela Robin, Hummingbird by Sophia Elaine Hansen. These poetry collections really just touched me in a way that I haven't felt before. I always thought of poetry as this thing that was super inaccessible to me personally. I enjoyed it to some extent when I studied it in high school, but I never really understood it and felt that it understood me back. And so I never really considered poetry as a way for me to, I don't know, write my story, publish a book, any of those things. I've always been really big into writing. Ever since I was in like first grade, I've been writing short stories, I've been writing lyrics. I used to be a songwriter. It's kind of obvious now that poetry should be the way that I write my stories, but until that spring, I never really thought it was something that other people would want to read. I'm pretty good friends with Amanda Lovelace, and so I was talking to her while I read her book, and I was just so excited about it. I loved it, I was obsessed with it, and she kind of just pushed me to write poetry. It took me a while to actually take her advice and put it into action, but in that spring, the spring of 2017, I was just like, really thinking about it. I really considered it for a long time. While I was in this creative writing class, I had to write super specific poems for my professor, and she had specific prompts, specific types of poems, very traditional, and so I spent a lot of time working on those poems for the class, but in my free time I had this running Google Doc where I basically just would scribble down ideas, write down short poems. If you've read contemporary poetry, you know that it's kind of simple for the most part. It can seem that way to the outside viewer, but a lot of times it's just, 2 or 3 lines, one really quick idea, and like that's a poem. And so I kind of did that, and in the Google Doc I wrote and wrote and wrote, and I didn't think I had an end in mind at that time. I didn't really consider that I was going to write a collection and put it all together and self-publish it and like do the thing. And so I really was just kind of writing down ideas, things I was feeling, trying to figure out what a concept could be for a book. And so over the course of that next year, I just kind of would occasionally sit down and add like a bunch of poems, and then I'd put it away for a while, add a bunch of poems, put it away. And so I didn't really get into it until about a year later, in the spring of 2018. January 2018, I actually forced myself to kind of sit down at my computer, and I really hunkered down and wrote a first draft of this poetry collection. At the time, it was really just figuring out kind of what story I wanted to tell, combining all of the poems that I had written in an order that I felt was like good enough to publish, that made sense. And so I kept writing for about that first month, and by the end of January I had a first draft, and suddenly it was happening, and I had no idea what was actually going to go down over the next 12 months. In February of 2018, I sat down and I actually picked out my first set of beta readers. A lot of my beta readers ended up being really good friends of mine. There are a couple people who were just random strangers from the internet that I enlisted, and I spent that whole month editing the draft and working through it and thinking that I was like really close to being done, and that's not at all the case. I actually edited this collection from about February to December of 2018, and it wasn't like all the time that I was working on it. There were a couple months that I like set it aside and forced myself not to think about it because I wanted to get a new perspective, but because I am the editor of this collection, I really just had to like put my heart and soul into it. I kind of went about it by writing a draft, sending it off to people to read, getting back comments, and then editing it, and then doing it all over again. And so I really just like worked hard on the editing for a good 10 or 11 months. It started turning into a real book. And it wasn't until about the 4th or the 5th draft through it that I was finally confident in the story and confident in the direction it was going. It started to feel more unique, more like my story, and I just really got into it. It was very exciting for me. It is Wednesday, September 12th in the afternoon, and I am getting ready to do another step on my poetry collection. I haven't made a lot of progress today on my poetry book.
but I am working right now on edits for the world narrative part of it, the overarching like general narrative. I added in all of the new poems that I wrote into the order, and I like reordered things again, and I think I finally am ready to like put it all on my computer and like finish editing individual poems, because I think I'm satisfied with the narrative, and I'm so fucking excited. Like, oh my goodness, it's so much work, but I'm so happy that I did it because wow, it's so much better than it was.
I edited the draft all the way through about mid-December. About November, December, around that time, I kind of realized when I wanted to release the book. And so it gave me a deadline, which was a good thing. Otherwise, I would have worked on it forever. But it also started to stress me out a little bit. I ended up deciding on a release date of March 5th because I actually have a poem coming out in Amanda Lovelace's new book. So it felt like a good time to kind of release my book and her book at the same time so people could find me and that sort of thing.
I wrote that. It's up for pre-order. Oh my goodness gracious, what?
Because it was coming out in March and I was doing all the formatting, I was starting to get a little bit nervous because I did not choose an easy route for the formatting. I feel like a lot of poetry collections these days kind of come across as, I don't know, simple and basic, and a lot of people have gotten sick of the like traditional contemporary poetry format. And that isn't to say that I don't like that format, that I think it's simple, like whatever. I know there's a lot of work that goes into poetry collections. However, because it's my collection and I can do what I want, I decided to go about the formatting in a completely unique and different way. And so it is very different from other poetry collections, I think. But in order to get to that place, I had to really just be creative and work hard. So I figured out kind of how I wanted to format the book in about September. I figured out how I wanted to go about creating it and how to make it unique and really how to make it the book that I want to release. But I didn't actually start formatting it until I finished editing the full thing in December. So about mid-December through the end of February, I spent formatting like a crazy person. I went to coffee shops, I sat at my kitchen table for like 7 hours at a time. I worked and worked and worked. I listened to so many audiobooks, you really have no idea. I just listened to them nonstop. And it was awesome. It was so much fun. I absolutely loved it. It was the kind of art project that I've done in the past, and I really enjoy doing that hard work because it's fun for me. But because of the time that I set the release date and how late it took me to edit, the formatting got very exhausting very quickly because I did have about 300 poems to format.
It's February 2nd. It's like 11 p.m. I've been trying to format this book for the past like 2 or 3 hours. I'm freaking out a little bit. It's fine. I spent tonight just like laying down the groundwork for the last part of the book. I've been going really slow with the beginning of part 5, putting in like words and photos at the same time, and I decided that that was just taking way too long and I wasn't making enough progress. And so tonight I just like pasted in the rest of the poems on the watercolor background. And so, oh god, it was just exhausting. Because I laid that groundwork, I kind of know how much further I have to go and like what needs to get done in the next like 2 weeks. Basically I have like 270 poem pages in the book, and some of those poem pages have multiple poems on them, but that's like the baseline of how many I have. Right now I've been pasting in pictures for part 5, so I'm at like 225 I think, which leaves me with about 50 that I still have to paste the photos in for. I haven't done any doodling on part 5, and I still have to finish some of the doodles for part 4. So yeah, it's fine. I'm freaking out a little bit. Like, I know I can do it. It's just like, it feels like that point, like at the end of a semester where you've been working on like a semester long like paper or a project or like an art piece or something, and you're like super excited about it because it's like finally coming together and you love it and it's awesome. However, you have to go over that last final hurdle of like, oh, I have to like finish editing it, or I have to get this last piece from like one of my group partners, and then I have to make it look good or whatever. And it's like, you know, it's like 1 a.m. and like your paper is due the next day, and you're like freaking out because you're like, I know I have to get it done, but like I have to sleep, right? I have to sleep, or should I work on the thing? Like, which one should I do?
By some miracle, I ended up finishing the formatting like a week just over a week before the book was actually due to Amazon. And it was exhilarating and terrifying and wonderful all at the same time. And then I released it, and it was out in the world. It was a real book. What the heck? Honestly, this whole experience has just taught me a lot about myself. It's taught me so much about like self-publishing and the writing process and being an author and marketing and just like a lot of different parts of the business, which was super interesting to me. I think more than anything, this experience has really shown me that like I can finish things. For the longest time, I've been trying to write some kind of cohesive work. For a while there, I thought I was supposed to be a novelist, and I think I can still write a novel. I think it's gonna happen for me someday, but I was so bogged down by not finishing. Like, I haven't finished a first draft of a novel in about 10 years. I never finish any of the big projects that I set out to do because I either get lazy or I decide to quit or whatever. And this is the first real project outside of school that I have actually like start to finish, like put 110% of my effort in. I've really focused on it. I've made it a priority. I've been excited about it. Like the passion I have for this project did not die at all throughout the process. Like every single step of the experience, it just got more and more wonderful to me and more exciting, and I was more proud of it. And like I just truly fell in love with writing poetry and design and telling my story. And so that's the biggest takeaway I've had from this book, is that I can do it, and I can do it on my own, and I am talented, and like I have passion and all of this stuff that I think I knew deep down, but I never had proof to myself that like I can do things and I can finish stuff. So going forward, I don't know if I'm gonna write more poetry, if I'm gonna finish a novel, if I'm gonna do something completely out of the writing world. But I know I can finish things. If I really put my mind to it and I commit, that is the one thing I've learned from this process, is that I can do it. A supernova shimmered through the sky, lighting up the cosmos for an instant, and that explosion of space breathed magic into the heart of a lost star. The star cried out as she saw the dark path laid out before her, twisting in the sky to escape her brutal, undiscovered destiny. So she fell. She hurtled to the earth, clutching her inner spark like a talisman, and for a moment she wondered who she'd be. She awoke on the hard ground, born of stardust and moonshine, bright and flushed and breathtaking, ready to set the world on fire. You are so different from the other two. When I set out to write this collection, I was very conscious of what other poetry collections were doing, and I think the entire contemporary poetry world at this point has become very, very similar. Now, that isn't to say that every poetry book is the same, because it's totally not, and I believe that even if you have a similar story or a similar trauma with somebody, your story is going to be different because you wrote it. You can share similar themes, you can share all kinds of similar poems, but they're all going to be unique because you wrote them. All that being said, I personally, when I was setting out, I wanted to write a book that I knew was going to be different than any other book on the market. A lot of poetry collections are kind of based off of romance. They're based off of like this intense like sexual trauma and like sexual assault, sexual violence, whatever, which is totally valid, and I think we need that kind of writing. But I can't really relate to that. And I know I have a lot of friends who, even though they want to read about it, they want to sympathize, whatever. Some people just can't relate to that. And I wanted to write a book for those other people, the people who haven't been in a romantic relationship, maybe the people who don't even want a romantic relationship. And I found the best way to write a story that isn't romantic is to write about friendships. And I think there's not enough books out there that are about friendships. I have had so many different friendships in my life that I wanted to find a way to kind of explain as many of them as I could in one work. I figured out that my story, the first story that I was going to write, was really a story of bad blood. I've always been fascinated by the idea of like bad blood, friendship feuds, whatever. Because I've experienced a number of those, and I thought, I still have feelings about these things. I've never really written about them. I've written a couple songs in the past, but I haven't really dug into those feelings before, and I feel like I haven't done that story justice ever. And so that's what I did. This story, the one that I actually wrote for this collection, is like my deepest trauma. I don't see it as trauma because I don't think it really damaged me that deeply. It may come across that way in the book, but I really don't think it counts as trauma in my head. But it is the biggest emotional experience that I've had in my life. Other people's big trauma is like a huge breakup, or like they had this, you know, sexual violence thing happen to them or whatever. Mine is I just have a bunch of really strong friendship breakups that I've been thinking about for about 10 years. So that is how I kind of chose it. I chose it as something that was personal to me, something that I haven't really touched on myself, but also something that I felt was so different from what's on the market these days that I could make it relatable to a different group of people. I basically had a list in my mind of what regular poetry books do these days versus what I want out of a poetry book. Because even though I love Instagram poetry and I love that short and sweet writing, and like I have so many poems like that, so it's not that I'm saying I didn't do that, but there's so many things and stereotypes and various cliches that have started to come out of this contemporary poetry genre that I constantly was thinking, how do I make this different? How do I make this into something that I feel is more meaningful? How do I turn it into something that is more accessible to more people, that more people can relate to, that I feel like is different? You know, and part of that is a marketing perspective. Like, I wanted to make a book that other people would want to buy because it's different. It was also just for me personally. Like, I don't like a lot of things about the contemporary poetry world, and so I was kind of setting out to make changes and do something maybe revolutionary. I don't know. I want to be different, and so that's what I did. I made a lot of my decisions based on that. However, I did choose this more Insta poetry format rather than like traditional long drawn out poems that have rhyme schemes or, you know, whatever, haikus, anything like that. I chose this rather than the traditional route because I feel like personally I connect more with the Instagram poetry. I think it's easier for me to write. It's much more clear and concise. I think a lot of people can get more out of it these days than from traditional poetry. But I know that there's so many fans of traditional poetry out there who may consider reading my book, who may get mad about my book, who may critique my book, like whatever. So I did have that in mind as I was writing. I didn't want it to be solely Instagram poetry, so I tried my best to kind of mix it up and make it accessible to both sides of that. But I do really like Instagram poetry because it's accessible to me and I love it. It's easy to read. I say a lot that it's inspired by Amanda Lovelace's books, and I've already had a couple people be like, ooh, this sounds like a lot like Amanda's. The theme sounds similar, or the writing sounds the same, or like whatever. And I know there's going to be a lot of people who compare the two, and that's great because I kind of wrote with that in mind. I'm such a huge fan of Amanda's works. I think she is really, really incredible at writing her feelings and sharing stories and like coming up with concepts. I am such a huge fan of hers. Even though I think we're really good friends, like I am also just like in awe of her work. However, I did set out to make it different. Like, it is not like Amanda's books because I wrote it. It may have similar themes with, like, you know, witches and fantasy and princesses, and maybe, I don't even think I have mermaids in there, but it has a lot of similar fantasy themes to Amanda because I also like those themes, and I think a lot of the fans that I have, if you can call it that, they like fantasy, and I wrote it as a fantasy narrative, and so I am a little bit annoyed when people are like, oh, you wrote about witches? Like, Amanda Lovelace already did that, and it's like, listen, honey, I love Amanda, but she does not have a monopoly over the idea of witches. Like, everybody loves witches. Let's just make that clear. A lot of people have wanted to know if I use, like, Pinterest to do stuff, because when I write fiction, I love using Pinterest as like writing inspiration, figuring out characters, worlds, etc., etc. Technically, I have a board for this book. Part of it is like inspiration, kind of like the aesthetic of the book, but a lot of the Pinterest I used for this book was actually for like the design and the formatting, and the cover specifically. Like, I have boards for the cover, I have boards for how I want the inside to look. I drew a lot of inspiration from Pinterest for the actual physical design of it. As for the concept, like, yes, I did use Pinterest a little bit to figure out kind of what it was going to look like. Thinking in mood boards and stuff like that really has helped me and my brain process writing. But overall, like, I didn't really use Pinterest that much for the poems because my brain just, like, doesn't think like that. I think a lot of people might be wondering, like, did you know how you were going to format it while you were writing it? Did you know it was going to turn into this kind of book when you were starting out? And to that I say yes and no. I think a lot of what's awesome about writing and creating a book like this is that at the beginning you have a lot of preconceived notions about how it's going to go. You think, oh, this is my expectation, this is what I want, this is kind of my idea. But by the time you actually start doing it and you make it to the end of the project, you realize either the book has changed or something in you is different, or you just realize that something isn't going to work out the way that you want it to, and your concept kind of shifts a little bit as you edit, as you format, as you create more and more of this book. And so, yes, I did know that I wanted it to be multimedia. I knew that I wanted to make it really, really pretty. Like, I thought originally it was just gonna have doodles and it was gonna be more consistent with like regular poetry collections. But as I really like got into the project and I edited and I thought more about how I can make it unique to me, I realized that like the only way I could actually make it mine is if I really added photos and I made it more mixed media than just poems. I didn't actually get the idea for like the interior design until about September. I had been thinking about it for a while. Ever since I started editing, I really was thinking about the interior, but it didn't really fully come into itself until later on in the editing process. Deep in the chambers of my heart, I buried a secret so black, it stained my fingers and clung to my clothes like smoke. At my darkest, I retreat, until even those closest to me become my adversary, making enemies of all. Poetry is such a different writing process for me than writing a fiction novel, or even writing like a short story or a smaller fictional work. Granted, my poetry collection is a little bit more toward fiction and prose. It is full of poetry, but it is a story. It's a narrative, it's fantasy based. I tried to keep it a little bit more story-like than just like a collection of poems, you know. Writing at the beginning, I didn't realize that. I didn't know how much it was going to become like a story. At the time, I was just like, oh, I'll just write a bunch of poems, then I'll put them in an order and it'll be great. And that's what I thought was going to happen. So I didn't sit down to write like an outline. I didn't have an idea of what this story was going to be. I kind of knew generally which experience in my life I wanted to touch on, but I didn't really know what it was going to look like in the end. So at the beginning, my writing process was literally just, I'm going to write out a poem in this Word doc, and I'm going to separate everything by like lines so I can put about 10 or 12 poems on the page. And then I'll just, you know, write until I have, you know, like 50 pages of text, and then I'll actually go through and turn it into a draft. And that was originally like my writing process, was just write and don't think about it as a collection, just write poems and like hope for the best. And a lot of people ask like, how do you write contemporary poetry? Like, what does that mean? Especially because a lot of contemporary poets end up doing the thing where it's like a sentence but with really specific line breaks, and you're like, is that really poetry? I don't know. Poetry is subjective. How I went about it was I would write like ideas or sentences or whatever, and I would be like, that's it, that's the poem. I don't really have to edit it. It's wonderful and cliche and awesome and everybody's gonna get it. And it isn't until you go through the editing process that you're like, oh, this is too cliche and also not clear at all to the reader what you're talking about. So a lot of those ideas and concepts and poems that I called poems at the beginning were not actually poems. They were ideas that I then later turned into real poems. But at the time when you're writing down all these poems at the beginning, like, you can't really think about it too much, because so much I feel like of poetry for me is in the rewrites and in the editing and creating it as a cohesive work rather than just like focusing on individual poems. I didn't actually realize what it was going to be until a few rounds of edits, and so it's hard for me to talk about like the initial writing process because it feels so different than what I have now. And I think the writing process for this book was actually the editing process, if that makes sense. Because even when I was in, you know, the 5th or 6th round of edits, I was adding poems. Like, I added poems almost all the way up until the end, which is why the book is about 300 pages long. But I just like writing, and I felt like, you know, 100 poems wasn't enough to tell this story. And I also just am, I understand short poetry collections, I really do. but it hurts my soul because I think they should be longer. I think we should give the reader more. I want you to have more of the story. I want more poems, longer poems, more poems on a page, you know, just like the whole thing. So a lot of people ask like how long the editing process took, because honestly, a majority of this work was working on the editing of the writing itself. I didn't want to go in and start formatting it until I had like a final draft of the writing done. Just because I knew there was going to be a lot of moving parts in the formatting. I knew I wasn't going to want to be worrying about that writing when I was creating the art. And so I forced myself to not work on the formatting really until like the end. And the editing, like I said, took about, 10, 11 months, give or take. There were 7-ish drafts. And so, like I said, for the editing, I kind of went about it with finishing a draft, sending it to beta readers. I would work on individual comments from beta readers as I read through the draft the first time. And then after that, I would kind of make notes of like, oh, this is what I would change. This is how I want the book to become different. This is an idea that they had that I couldn't really work on with the individual poem, but I want to implicate it in what is the word? I want to introduce it to the rest of the work. I kind of take stock of what I wanted to change and what needed to evolve in this next draft. And so after I did individual poem changes, I would go through and kind of look at the work as a whole and edit as a whole, and go through all the way from the beginning and kind of think for myself of like, oh, how do I want to edit this? How do I think this should change? I self-published this book, so I didn't feel like I needed to go hire an editor because I'm pretty competent, you know? I'm pretty great at editing other people's works, actually. And I did have a lot of other friends who were pretty good at editing that kind of helped me out along the way. But that meant so much of this draft is always on my shoulders. Like, I am the one who has to make the hard decision of being like, Jenna, like this poem, not doing it. You have to cut it, you have to edit it, you have to change this part of it. Like, I'm the one who has to make these hard decisions, and I'm the one who has to be creative in the editing process. And so it was hard that way. In the first few rounds of editing, like drafts 2 and 3, I was really frustrated because I felt like it was really great, but people were still coming back saying, what if you did this? What if you did this? Or this doesn't flow quite right. Like, I still think you need to work on this. And I was just very content with leaving it the way that it was at the beginning. And so it wasn't until about midway through the editing that I finally was like, oh my gosh, wait a minute. If I do this, it totally changes the whole story and it's a lot of editing work. But if I can do it correctly, like, it'll be the story I want to tell, it'll be more interesting, it'll be more of a narrative, it'll flow better, whatever. I'm so much prouder of it because I did it, you know? I edited it. I was the one who had the ideas to change most of it. And I will say, like, a lot of it is from my beta readers. Like, so many of my friends offered incredible suggestions. They're the reason this book is the way it is, because a lot of it I didn't think of. They were the ones who were like, you should do this. This is what would make it better. And so I have to thank them because the beta readers really just like did a lot for me. But I was also the one who printed out 300 poems and put them on her floor and printed them individually and cut them all out and then manually moved them around.
I think the total number of drafts so far is up to like 6-ish. This is kind of the 6th draft. Basically at this point I'm just tightening the narrative and adding in little poems here and there so it, like, I don't know, makes it more cohesive and has better transitions, and it just really tells the story that I want to tell. Today I am doing something rather creative and exciting. So I printed out my collection. I didn't put them all on individual pages because that seemed like a waste of paper. So I have them I have multiple ones per page. And basically what I'm doing is I have them color coded based on the narrative and kind of like their meaning in the collection. And so I'm gonna cut them all out and I'm going to like look at them visually and see what I can move around, what I can delete, what I can add. And I don't know, I was just like really bored with keeping it all on Word, and so now I'm like, who knows, let's be creative, let's see what happens. Literally, why am I like this? This is only 3 out of 5 parts and it just like goes on forever. Like, why? Why are we like this?
A lot of people want to know what exactly it means when I'm editing. There were a couple things that I really focused on in the editing process. Number one, probably the most important thing, is word choice. I spent so much time on thesaurus.com just trying to find the right words to make things different. I had this problem about halfway through kind of the 4th or 5th draft where I really liked using the words witches and tyrants, which is fine because that's kind of what my whole book is about. But I had a lot of beta readers be like, you have used this word so much. Can you please use something different? And so I really had to just like force my mind to do like Command F and like find all of the witches and change like half of them to like weird like enchantress or something like that, something different so that it wouldn't be all the same word. So a lot of my editing was actually me just being like Command F and finding very specific words that I know I had used throughout the entire work and changing it up to make it different and more unique and whatever. I'll think about how that poem fits between the two poems on either side of it. It was very difficult to work on a narrative because I really had a lot of different topics that I was working towards, but I wanted to make them flow together pretty seamlessly to feel like a cohesive work. And I feel like it's different than other poetry collections because I feel like most poetry collections are a collection of poems that have a lot in common, but aren't necessarily a story. Like, if you read them together, you can get an idea of what the story is, but it's not somebody sitting down and being like, so this is what happened to me, and this is the exact order that it happened in, and it all flows together, and, like, that's that. Poetry collections, I feel like, are more general, and they sometimes make sense, but a lot of times they're very vague, and you can't get a full picture of what it looks like. For this one, I wanted it to be, like, me, the narrator, telling you the story of my life, and this is the order that it happened in. It's chronological, it makes sense, it flows into each other, and it feels like a fiction story, but it's actually poetry. And so in the editing process, that was one of the things I worked on a lot. I worked on transitions. I worked on making sure that poems on any side of anything were cohesive, that they worked together, that they made sense, that there was transitions. And so a lot of the editing when I wasn't working on word choice or individual poems was making sure that like poems flowed into each other and that it all was cohesive and it transitioned smoothly. And that was probably the hardest part of this whole thing, was making sure it transitioned well between very diverse topics. And then the last big thing that I focused on was individual themes. I have a number of different themes in this collection. Going into it, I knew that I wanted to touch on specific topics and specific stories, but it wasn't until about the fourth or fifth edit that I was like, wait a minute, like I have about 3 individual narratives going on in this one cohesive big narrative, and how do I make that happen, and how do I write about these themes that are important to me, but also have these themes fit into the bigger theme, the umbrella theme of like the book, and like how do I work with these individual themes. And when I was working on the fifth draft I think is one of the biggest turning points for me because it was super extra the way I went about it, but also it changed so much for me and it really became like the book. You may have heard me talk about it, but the fifth draft in September was when I did pretty much a major overhaul of everything. I thought it was a really great idea that I would print out the whole book basically and then just like manually arrange it on my floor. Sounded like a great idea, was pretty helpful, but I had to print out and cut out about 300 individual poems, which was a lot. But when I was printing them out, I kind of organized them all by color. And so I would color specific poems based on their theme or based on their narrative, based on their story. And so when I talk about the 3 main narratives, I'm talking about the umbrella narrative of like light versus dark, good versus evil, that mainly follows the witches versus the tyrants. So that's kind of like just like the general world fighting against each other, like the oppressors versus the oppressed. That's like the main narrative. But if you get a little bit deeper into my life specifically, then you have my relationship with my friends. And so I have 3 main friendships that I focus on in this collection. 2 of them were really toxic. 1 of them is still happening and I love her. And so that was kind of the second narrative of me finding like my best friend, but working through that as my life went on. And then the final narrative is even more specific, and it focuses on me as an individual and kind of fighting my own internal darkness, which kind of looks like me having mental health, depression kind of issues, but also me like hating my body and hating the people around me and being jealous and possessive and like working on that. And so, like I said, it goes into 3 different colors, 3 different themes, 3 narratives. But along with that, I have general poems about general things. So like I have sections on asexuality, I have sections on religion, I have sections on just like various other things that I feel like relate to the story, relate to my life, that I wanted to write about. And so I would put all of those under specific colors as well. And it was super helpful to get to put them all on the floor and see all the colors and see like, how long is this narrative? Where does this color match up with another color? How often is that showing up in each different part? Because I have 5 parts to work on. How do I make it flow seamlessly? How does it make sense? I really want to have parallelism. There's a lot of different moments where I tried to pull specific individual theme strings. So you'll find words from like part 1 all the way showing up in part 5, poems from part 2 that match up with the poem in part 4. Like, the editing process for me is so important because I worked so incredibly hard on pulling individual poems and making sure that, 1, they flowed with the other poems around it, but 2, that it could match up with a poem that was, you know, like 100 pages away. And that has to do with word choice, it has to do with placement, it has to do with transitions. Like, it was just a huge balancing act for me. And as I was going through part 5, I was working so hard on manually moving things and making sure that my brain could see, like, this is where this shows up, and this should be moved over here, this needs a transition, this needs whatever. And so it was really powerful, and like, I loved that point of the collection because I felt like I could really see it coming into like a real narrative, a real story. But it was a lot of work. And the thing about the editing process that I found is it really made me appreciate other poetry collections. I think a lot of people read contemporary poetry and they think, oh, it's just a couple sentences, like, it's really not that difficult, like, anyone can do this. And I do believe anyone can write a poetry collection. But I found through the editing that, like, if you want to make it cohesive, if you want it to make sense, if you want to have it actually be something that's really intricate and complex, like, it may seem like a couple sentences to you, it may seem like 300 sentences that you're reading, but, like, it's not easy. It was so difficult. And it took a lot of going back to the drawing board and really finding specific words, specific themes, specific whatever, to create a work that is truly a collection of poems. Resistance starts quietly, with whispered words and hushed tones, telling anyone who will listen that corruption has feasted on the realm. There are no explosions of change, no victorious cries for justice, no quick-fix assassinations to shock the world. Revolution is feeding the poor and standing up for the innocent, even when the enemy tries to convince you that selfish is the status quo. Rebellion has humble beginnings because it must be pure at heart to create a better world and succeed where all else has failed. There is no magic in insurgence. Editing took the longest time for me. Like I said, it was about 10 or 11 months of just hardcore editing, sitting at my computer, writing, all of that jazz. However, it wasn't the hardest part, actually. I think I had the most fun doing the editing because it was like really working my brain in a way that hasn't been worked in a while, and I just loved it. It was so fun. But the formatting was just exhausting. It was fun at the beginning. About the first 50 pages, I was like, this is great. And then after that, I kind of wanted to fling myself off a cliff. When I was creating the concept for this poetry collection, I wanted it to be very different from anything you've seen on the market. I wanted it to break the usual boundaries of contemporary poetry. I wanted it to be something visually stunning that people would look at it and actually stay on the page after they've read like 2 lines of text and be like, how does this relate? What is this? This is so interesting to me, you know? I think a huge problem for contemporary poetry, and one of the biggest critiques about it, is that because so many contemporary poems are, you know, like a sentence, it's very easy to read these poetry collections in, you know, like 30 minutes. And I'm guilty of that. I do that as well when I'm reading, but I didn't want that for my poetry book. If it was in my power to change that, I would make it something that you would want to stay on that page for another 10 minutes if you had to. And because it's pretty, like, I wanted something pretty. That was my goal for the whole project. I wanted it to be beautiful, and I wanted it to represent me in a way that I felt confident about. And I had a lot of different variations on the idea. It started out pretty simple. I thought about doing it in Illustrator. I thought about working on InDesign and creating it. I thought about all these different things. I really wanted to use digital handwriting, and so I ended up getting one of those little drawing pads from Amazon with a little stylus pen. And I spent so much time like digitally drawing for like a week. I talked to so many friends. I sent lots of different ideas to people and was like, what do you think? How should I make this? How do I do this? What should I do? And so I had a number of different people coming back back to me being like, this is beautiful, like you should do this, I think this is the final one, you should whatever. And a lot of times I would send a photo to somebody and they'd be like, this is it, this is the one, you did it. And I'm like, it's not quite there yet. And then I ended up talking to my best friend Laura, and I was like, what do you think? Like, how do I do this? I'm so lost. And she and a number of other people were like, you should make it like a journal. And I was like, yes, I think that's the idea I've been working towards, but how do I do that? When I finished editing the whole thing in December, I sat down and was like, all right, you gotta do this, you gotta figure it out. And it took a little bit of trial and error, but eventually I figured out a system of how I wanted to do it, how to make it consistent, how to create something that I was proud of that really felt authentic. And I ended up choosing the most difficult way to design the interior of this book. So the final concept. You've probably seen it if you've read the book. You know what it looks like. I made every single page individually in Photoshop. Once I finished creating it in Photoshop, I exported the file as a TIFF image, which is like a really high quality image file. And then I would individually place every single image file in InDesign. So the InDesign file was super easy. I just had to paste. That was fine. Like, I had no problem with that. The problem was I had to make everything individually in Photoshop, and it had to have the same exact dimensions, the same exact margins, the same exact font, type, style, size, background, whatever. It all had to be the same in Photoshop. The way it's laid out, what I would do, I would sit down, I would create a new file that is the exact height and width of the book, and then I would set up the margins, which was a guide layout that I had created that matches the margins of the book. And then I would duplicate from the original file a background of watercolor paper so that it looks more like paper in a journal than it does like an actual digital book. I ended up adding some adjustment layers on top of that so it would be a little bit brighter. And then on top of that, I pasted the text file of the poem that I was going to do. On top of that, I would add photos, individual photos. Sometimes it was one, sometimes more. Then I would sometimes add like Photoshop shapes so that that would give it a little bit of texture. If I did a shape, I would add noise to it so that it can look a little bit more unique, more textured, not so digital. Then on top of all of that, I would add digital doodling or digital writing, depending on what I wanted to do. And then on top of that, so for the font for this book, it is not a real font per se. It was created by one of my really good friends who also did the cover for my book, and I said, oh my gosh, like I love your font so much, you created it for everybody to use, can I use it for my book? She was like, yeah, sure, whatever. So I love her font because it is a serif font, but it's kind of hand lettered, so it looks a little bit more like a journal, but it's also easy to read. That's what I wanted, but also unique. And it's awesome, I love it, it's beautiful. Obviously I chose it for a reason. However, I found through the editing and through looking at it on different screens and pages, her punctuation does not stand out well as a whole. And so I individually placed every single comma and every single period in this book. Every single one of them. So that's kind of how I finished out each page, is I would copy and paste the punctuation. And if you're listening to this and you're like, Jenna, this sounds terrible, why did you do this way? Well, I don't know, but I did it and it's done. So I don't have to worry about it anymore. I placed my photos in this book. You'll know that. If you know me, I am a huge photographer. Like, that is my day job. That is my side hustle. Like, I just love photography. I've been taking pictures since I was a child, basically, elementary school. So I have tens of thousands of photos, probably at least like 100,000 photos that I've taken in my lifetime on my computer. And these are like film scans, they are old family pictures, they're digital photos from my DSLR, digital photos from like 8th grade on my old point and shoot camera. I have iPhone photos up the wazoo. I literally just have photos coming out of my ears, and I haven't actually used any of them for like a big project before. And I hate that they're just sitting on my computer. So naturally I was like, this is it, I'm gonna show off my photos, it's gonna be wonderful. A lot of the process of formatting was actually spent picking out which photos to place on each page. Some of the photos totally match up and you'll read it and you'll be like, oh my gosh, how does she have this photo for this specific time? Like, wow, it's so well thought out. And like, I chose those for a reason. Some of them, however, are just visually pleasing and I really had nothing else to put there. And so you're gonna be like, this has nothing to do with the poem. I know, I get it. But I wanted to show that photo, so get over it. Another thing that you'll notice while reading this collection is that I whited out all the eyes of the people, including myself. And I did that on purpose because, number one, like, I want this collection to be relatable, and I don't want people looking at the people in the photos of me specifically and being like, this is the main character, like Jenna is the person. And while you will recognize my face if you know me, I think it's easier to focus on the poems when you aren't looking at people's eyes and you're not seeing these people as real people. The second reason I did it is because I did not have the time, the energy, or the ability to ask permission for all these people to be in my book. The way I see it, I took the pictures, so like I kind of hold the copyrights for most of them. However, it's, first of all, it's not polite. Second of all, the ethics of it is questionable. And third, like, I know people just aren't gonna want to be in it. And so I whited out the eyes, so you really, unless you know my friends and you know the people in the book, like, you're not gonna be able to tell who they are. But I did that for privacy's sake, so there's reasons why I do all the things that I did in this book, but I tried to think about all the people and be considerate. So if you're in this book and you didn't want to be, I'm so sorry, but I did think about it, and also I hold the copyright, so.
It is January 25th. The shutdown is supposed to end, so that's good. I have been working for forever, but today I've been working for like 5 hours or so on my poetry book. Today I got to page 200, which is freaking awesome because I want to be done. But at this point, I'm hoping I can finish part 4 within the next like couple of days. Like before King of Scars comes out, definitely want to be done with part 4. It's Friday, so there's like a weekend, but we'll see. I also really need to finish Crooked Kingdom before Tuesday, so at this point Crooked Kingdom may or may not win.
The process for this is a little bit different than the editing one. I only had about 3 drafts of this, formatting, whatever. 1, because I didn't think it needed anymore, and 2, because I really just was sick of working on it at that point. So the first draft was about mid-December through the end of January. I did like every page, all 300 of them, and I just did them, and I finished, and I was like, that's it, that's how long it's going to be. Halfway through that draft, about page 120, I started getting nervous that the actual printed proof was not going to look the way I wanted it to because of the way I did the formatting and the files. And so I sent off the first about 120 pages to Amazon to get printed as a sampler, just to make sure that it all looked the way that I wanted it to. And so I did get that first proof about mid-January, and it was a lot. It was crazy. First of all, it worked, which was really amazing to me. But second of all, it was just really weird to hold it as like a physical book that was real. Like, that was the first moment that I was like, this is actually happening. That's crazy. This is like a huge moment. This is like a real paperback book that I made. I don't even want to look at it. Okay. Wow. How does it look? Do you guys like it? This is, okay. Fuck, I'm so scared. God, please let this work. Oh my God, it's my book. Oh my God. Oh my God, it's my, okay, this is a lot. I'm fine, this is, okay. Oh my God, look at this side. Wow, you can't even see it very well. I'm sorry. This is so much. I don't even think I'm gonna, oh, okay. It's gonna be fine if it doesn't work out. But also like, oh my God. Me, the first page, it looks good, okay. Okay, this is, okay, all right, this is happening. This is really happening. Oh my God, oh my God, it worked. Oh my God. It worked. I think it worked. Oh my God! I'm screaming! Oh my God! I made a book! I'm literally, oh my God, guys. It fucking worked. It worked! Oh my God! Oh my God. I was really afraid they were gonna print this book and it was just going to not work and it was gonna look ugly and like I would hate it. But like, honestly, I'm so floored. This is like a real thing that I made. What the heck? After I did that and I finished the first draft, I sent all the pages off to Amazon to get a full proof. And so 300 pages of proof later, I get it back. And then I sat down and I read it. I read the whole book as a physical copy, and on each page I kind of wrote down things that I needed to edit, things that needed to be changed, commas that needed to be added that I forgot about, read through that, and then afterwards I went through and individually edited each of the pages one last time. I fixed punctuation. I ended up adding all the periods throughout that draft because I realized I needed to do that. Redesigned a couple pages, worked really hard on it. Afterwards, instead of getting another physical proof, I ended up exporting it as an EPUB so I could read it on my phone as an ebook. I read the whole thing straight through on my phone just to make sure it looked okay. I did find about 10 to 15 pages of little things that needed to be fixed, and so I ended up fixing those, and then that was it. It was done. It is 3:50, February 22nd, and I literally just finished my book. I finished it. It's done. Today was pretty chill. I actually spent most of the day filming footage for this documentary that you're watching. Hi, welcome to my show. So I was just like kind of putting off actually finishing this book because like obviously it's a big deal and like I've been working on it for forever and I don't want it to be done, but it needs to be done and I'm ready for it to be done, and so it is now finished. I did that. Today I only had to do, I had like maybe 10 or 15 pages that I just like needed little tiny tweaks. And so I just did those and I exported them and I put them all into my document. So it's not like 100% done, like I haven't actually uploaded it all to Amazon, but I did all of the formatting. I did everything. I edited it, I formatted it, I made it. We're here. It's crazy. Yeah, it's just weird because like I spent so much of the past 12 months, like literally the past 12 months working on this project, and so it's like it feels like a part of my life is coming to an end, and it is, and like, you know, whatever, it's sad, but I'm exhausted. Like it has really just been testing my patience, and I've been really like a lot of my life has been taking hits from it. Like I've not been taking care of myself. I'm 90% sure my roommates are just like really fed up with me because I've been crazy for the past like 2 weeks. Yeah, I feel like my life is in shambles, but the book is done, so that's really all that matters. Also, I'm really doing well on my reading, but aside from that, there's really just like chaos. My brain, my room, my life, chaos. But this book is also chaos, but it's done, so I don't have to worry about it anymore. I'm so excited. Basically all that's left to do right now is to upload everything to Amazon, submit my final stuff, and then it goes on the internet, so we shall see. It was a lot of work, but it was done. I did it. I did the formatting, and I really only needed about 3 formatting drafts to do it, which was really impressive to me personally. I did almost add an index at the back, specifically for references to various things. Because of who I am as a person, there are a lot of hidden little Easter eggs throughout the whole book. I think one of my favorite things about reading anything is that if you can make connections to either other works or inside the same work, seeing things, I think that just makes everything so much more exciting and interesting. And this kind of goes back to the idea of keeping people on the page and not really like flipping through as fast as they can. And so I wanted to have another little thing of people to be like, okay, so I see the photos and I see the poems, but like, what is this? Like, how does this connect? Like, what is this little thing? And I have literally so many pop culture references. Like, I actually asked my best friend to find as many as she could, and she found a lot of them, but she missed a couple. And so I know there's going to be people on the internet who find these references, and I'm very excited to see who finds what. But I thought originally about putting an index in the back of like all of the individual references, because there are a lot of them. And I decided not to, mainly because I think it's more fun if I don't explain it, because it's just no fun when you have the answers at the back of the book, you know? It makes you cheat, and I don't want people to cheat. I want people to work hard on it. So maybe eventually in the future someday I'll make a list and I'll like share it on the internet, but originally the plan was to just like let you find them all. And so I do actually have like a little plan of once the book is actually released and people have read it a little bit, I'm going to like actually deface a copy or 2 of my own so that I can give it away to somebody and be like, this is all the references, now you can see them and enjoy the things that I love. And like, it's honestly like all over the place on the references. Like, there is some Marvel references, Taylor Swift references, a couple Broadway references. There's like literally just so many references, a lot of song titles and albums and various little things like that. So I will give you one really quick hint if you are reading through it and you're like, Jenna, I have no idea how to tell what is a reference. Some of them are in the titles. If you see a title with quotation marks, kind of important, you'll probably recognize those. Those are the easiest ones to get. If a word is in italics in a regular poem, I think 99% of the time it is referencing something. So I'm not going to tell you what they're referencing because you got to figure that out yourself. But it is pretty exciting. I love my little Easter eggs. Sometimes, in order to evolve, we have to leave the ones we love and walk alone for a time. We do not abandon them. We do not leave forever, but we must embrace our own future. They say distance is good, that it makes the heart stronger, so we give ourselves room to grow. As each of us takes a different road, we must remember to let go, to give out freedom like confetti. We don't have to chain people down and hoard them like gold, for if the love is true, they'll always come back. I will see you again. Like I said, I self-published, which means I did everything for this book. And I thought long and hard about the cover because covers are very important. They're important in the business side of things because they just like show off what your book is. They're good for marketing. They're good for just like so many different things. And so I thought about that a lot when I was creating the cover. I considered at the beginning hiring one of my friends to do it because I have a number of really cool graphic design friends. I thought about hiring JD Netto because he does a lot of self-published covers that I really, really love. He's very talented. I also have my friend Margot who did the hand lettering and the font for this book, and I thought she would be a really great option. But I ended up finding that it was more fun for me to do it myself. And I didn't do it all on my own. I did get Margot to do the main title, the hand lettering, and she had the font for the front as well. But literally the rest of it was all me for the cover. I had the design, the concept, I created it in Photoshop, like I did everything except for the hand lettering. And so going into it, I spent a lot of time on Pinterest trying to decide what I wanted. Another thing about poetry collections is that they are very simplistic and minimalistic, which works for a lot of people. And when you don't have a lot of money or you don't have a lot of experience creating things in Photoshop, like I understand, it's sometimes just easy to put black background with a simple font in the front, and that's great. If that works for you, that's wonderful. That's awesome. If you love that. I don't. I wanted something better. I thought so long about what I wanted it to look like, and I also wanted it to kind of fit the inside, to be creative, to be something that's sophisticated, kind of minimal, but not too minimal. Something that you'll look at and you won't be like, oh, that book is self-published. I'm not picking that up, because I had that fear. I don't mind self-published works, and I think a lot of people are super talented in the self-published world. But it's so hard when people are just like, oh, it's self-published, I'm not gonna read it, it's probably terrible. And a lot of that comes from the cover, because self-published covers are either hit, they're wonderful, they will get republished and they're beautiful, or they're so terrible that you never want to look at it again. And so I was very sure that I wanted to make a cover that was memorable, that would stand out on Amazon, that was something that people would look at and be like, I can't tell, is that actually self-published? It looks really good. So that was the goal. I don't know if I succeeded on it, but I'm very happy with what I have because I made it. It's kind of similar if you've seen The Goldfinch. That was kind of the inspiration for it a little bit, but I didn't want it to be just The Goldfinch. I wanted it to be like my own thing. And so I really liked the idea. I wanted water on the cover. Originally, my cover concept was actually, I don't know if you've seen that photo series, but it's like ink dropped in like water. Specifically, The Temper Trap has a album cover that looks like that. And that was originally what I wanted. I wanted to do that. And so I did a couple test shots on my camera of like food coloring in water, and it was terrible. Let me just say, I actually have one of the photos in the poetry book, so you'll see it, but it was really bad and I did not feel like it would be cover worthy, so I scratched that idea. And then eventually I was like, okay, I still want to use my photography, I want to incorporate water, I want it to be something that feels like a journal type of thing. How do I do that? I have like an overlay of torn paper on the front that I found on the internet, on like a free transparency website. And then I was like, oh, I'll put water like in the background. That'll be really cool. And so what I did for that was I actually filled up my bathtub, turned out all the lights, got my camera, put it in a plastic bag, and I started taking pictures of the water. I did take a couple underwater pictures, which did not turn out the way I wanted to, but I ended up settling for like surface level pictures of like ripples because I think that's really, really beautiful and awesome, and it's water. And so I took a photo of my bathtub. I ended up tinting it really, really red because obviously, and then I kind of like put that in the background, put the torn paper over, and then I put the hand lettering that Margot did, and then I put like a title and a blurb at the top to make it look super professional, and that was the cover. I ended up doing author blurbs because I really just feel like that makes it even more professional. Like, I wanted to go for something that felt authentic but also felt like it could have been traditionally published. Luckily I have a lot of friends in the industry, so it wasn't super difficult for me to get them. It's weird if you know me because you're like, wait, you just got your friend Sasha to write about your book. That's not exciting. I didn't find a lot of authors that were outside of my network that I could get in touch with. I ended up being super happy with the ones that I got. Amanda Lovelace blurbed it for the front, which was so great, and a lot of people have already found it through that, which is just like amazing. I got Sasha Alsberg, the author of Zenith, #1 New York Times bestselling author. And then I also got Sophia Elaine Hansen, who wrote Hummingbird, the vinyl series, Soul Like Thunder. I feel like a lot of people are gonna ask and be like, why did you pick Sasha? First of all, Sasha is like one of my only friends who's actually published. But second of all, I chose her because I wanted to get fans of her books. You know, I think a lot of people will assume that it's a poetry collection, and so if you like poetry, that's why you should read it. But I want to draw in people who are fans of fantasy, fans of sci-fi, fans of like girl power novels, you know, like Sarah J. Maas fans or whatever. I wanted people to know that this is like a very different poetry collection than they're used to, that it doesn't have boundaries, that it's not one thing, that it's breaking stereotypes, whatever. And I felt the best way to do that was to get like an actual novelist to write about the poetry collection. So super happy. I love them. Sasha, Sophia, and Amanda are the best. And I'm so thankful for them. In the beginning, if you look at the little blurb page that I added, I took 2 Goodreads reviews. I had a couple friends and just like various reviewers write some reviews just so I could get some buzz generated. And I liked these 2 reviews so much that I decided that I was going to use them. I didn't tell them I was going to use them, but I really liked them anyways. Once upon a time, you called me wicked. So I donned a black cloak and embraced my title until I watched my skin turn green. Green for eternity, green for peace, green for naivety, green for renewal. But after a lifetime of shooing people away like flies, I found myself alone. So I joined the rebels, and I learned how to wield my magic. I let the light wash away 100,000 mistakes, and now I see we all have wickedness hidden inside us, but we have goodness too. I kind of haven't really had a chance to reflect on the end of this project because I just finished it recently. And the release is really soon, and I just like haven't settled down to think, you know, like the project is over. I recently started getting a little bit terrified of the prospect of it being over because so much of my free time over the past 12 months has been spent working on this collection. Especially the past like 4 or 5 months, all of my free time has been thrown into formatting or thinking about this book or editing this book or going to a coffee shop to think about this book, listening to audiobooks while working on this book. And to have all of that gone so quickly, like I'm excited. Don't get me wrong, I'm so tired and I'm ready for a break and I don't want to work on this book anymore. But it's like losing a friend. You know, it's like having a friend being with you for like a class, and then all of a sudden the class is over and you don't see that friend every day, and you're like, oh, like I miss you. I spent so much of my time with you, like I put my heart into you. I'm so happy I did it because when I started the process, I had no idea what it was going to turn into. And I think more than anything, it was really just a good experience for me to go through personally. It taught me a lot about myself and how I feel, how I work, how I finish projects, how I edit words. And so I learned a lot about who I was, but more than anything, it really just forced me to face a lot of who I am as a person. You know, when you're writing a poetry collection that's about your life, you have to get very personal very quickly. You have to get in touch with your emotions. You really have to think about who you are and who you're becoming and who you want to be. And I also was forced to think about who I was through this collection because I am writing about things that happened 10, 15 years ago. And more than anything, I think it's taught me that I am so tired of who I used to be. I have changed so much through this process, but also over the course of the past 10, 15 years, because obviously I'm an old woman now, I'm almost 24, and like going through this process and writing about the book, writing about my feelings, writing about old friendships and who I used to be, like people ask a lot of times if it was like emotional for me to write, and I'm not a super emotional person. Like, I can cry and I do have feelings a lot, but I'm not the kind of person that's like, oh my gosh, this friendship, it just like hurt my soul. I can't believe it ended this way. Like, I've dealt with a lot of these feelings in the past before, and so it wasn't hard for me to go deeper into them. Like, it really just showed me a lot about how I reacted to things, and more than anything, even though this book is about friendships and it's about how I dealt with those relationships at the time, I think it has actually taught me more about my personal growth and my personal experience of who I am as a person, specifically through like how I interact with people and how I treat myself. Like, one of the main narratives of this collection is obviously like my personal journey of finding the light, you know, fighting the darkness inside me. And that is actually like a common theme of 2019 for me. Like, I am working towards becoming a better version of myself in all areas of my life. I started this whole changing process thinking that like I really need to work on how I take care of myself. I need to work on exercise. I gotta learn how to cook. I gotta change my room. I gotta read more books. Like, that is how I need to make myself a better person. And through this process of writing the book, I think I realized that that is actually not the biggest problem. In the book, I go through this huge transition, and I come to the end and I realize like I can overcome my demons. I can be stronger than the darkness inside me, and I can like come out in the light, and like that's what I realized through the book. But in real life, like in the real world, I have found that I still have like a kernel of darkness inside me. If you've read Tower of Dawn by Sarah J. Maas, that's kind of the idea I'm getting at. Like, I'm still harboring a lot of grudges. I'm still really just not great at handling the darkness inside me, and it's something that I'm working on every single day. And I say darkness, and in this moment I actually don't mean depression. In the book, darkness is kind of the symbolizer of depression. It's not summer, so I don't feel depressed right now, which is great. But the darkness I'm kind of talking about is more like my wickedness and my jealousy and my selfishness. Like, I realized through writing this collection that I am a very selfish person. And I don't say that to be like, I'm so selfish, like I need to work on that, like whatever, dramatic, but like genuinely, like at the heart of who I am, my Enneagram type 5 INFJ person, like I am a selfish person. I care about who I am. I am self-oriented. I close in on myself when I get any kind of bad emotion. I am all about me, and that's who I am. And so writing this book, I was forced to face that, and I wrote a lot of poems about it, and I thought that I had overcome it all, and that's what the collection was about, and I believe that I have overcome a lot of it. But in releasing the book and like getting to the end of the process, I have found that I'm still working on it. And I'm a work in progress. Even though the book is done, even though I have like conquered some of those feelings of the past, like the thing that it has taught me is that I am a work in progress, and that I need to change. I really do. And on top of all that, the number one thing I think I've learned too about myself in this whole storyline of my life is that I'm ready to close the door. Like, this book is basically the first quarter of my life. I'm turning 25 next May in 2020. And so I'm releasing this just before that, and it covers pretty much my whole life of growing up. And I haven't had like my quarter life crisis yet. I haven't thought about turning 25 because I'm still not 24. But I do know that like all of this is pretty childish. Like, I know it's immature. I know bad blood and feuds are just like really pointless and stupid. And I see now that the relationship that I've left behind with those two girls, like, I need to let go. I understand that. I know I'm at this point where I've been dwelling on it too long, and it's time to just bury the hatchet and get over it, because it doesn't matter. And like, I really don't care. Genuinely, I can say that now after writing this book. Like, I don't care. I know, like, we were teenagers. It doesn't matter. But at the same time, like, it's a part of my life that like I lived through and I experienced, and it's like I feel as if I'm mourning the end of an era. And I felt this last summer when I met Taylor Swift, but I feel like I've come to a point where I'm finished with this chapter of my life. Like, I am changing into this new person, and when I start 2020, when I turn 25, I'm going to be a different person. I'm going to be new. I will have written a book. I'm going to have read 100 books. I will have learned how to cook and changed my life and whatever. Like, I know now that that's possible for me, and I know it's going to happen. Writing this book and releasing it right now feels like I'm finishing something, and it feels like I'm mourning the end of this chapter of my life. And it's terrifying to think that I have, you know, another like 75, 80 years left on this earth to live through, because I just did 25 and that's so many. But like, I've felt all these feelings and I've taken them in and I've really examined them, and it's time to let them go. It's time to move on. It's time to become someone fresh and have new relationships and new friendships and be with the people who have supported me recently. I haven't had a chance to really like reflect on the process and the book, and like, I'm so thankful for all that it gave me, all that it taught me, all that it's going to do for me in the next couple of months, because I know it's going to change people's lives, including mine. Yeah, it feels like I'm Marie Kondoing this book, like tidying up and being like, here's a part of my life. I am thanking it for all that it did for me, and now it is time to get rid of it, to let it go, to move on. I don't know what's gonna come next. I think a lot of people are probably wondering, like, are you gonna write another poetry collection? Are you gonna try writing a novel? Like, you guys wanna read more? What's coming next, you know? And I never wrote this book to be like the start of my writing career. I wrote it because I wanted to write a poetry book. So I'm not really sure what's going to come next. I have a couple ideas. And at this point, I think because I got so much confidence from that poetry collection, I am ready to go back to novel writing, and maybe finally finish a first draft of a novel and turn it into something really special. I have an idea that is new, that I am incredibly excited about, and I think it could be actually, like, genuinely actually the thing that I work on forever. So we'll see. I don't know. It's so early, and I understand now why when people release stuff, it's really weird when all of their fans were like, okay, this is great, but when are you releasing the next thing? Because it's like, I just spent 2 years working on this and you want more? Like, the audacity, come on. I don't know. I'm not really sure what's coming next, but I am happy with what's happened, and I know that great things are coming, and so I'll just have to wait and see. I don't know. I'm not really sure what's coming next, but I know God has a plan, and that's all that matters to me. If you like this documentary, if you're interested in actually seeing the final product of this, if you haven't already, my book, Water Runs Red, is currently available on Amazon. It is available in 2 editions, ebook and paperback. The ebook is in color, so you can see those beautiful photographs and the colors. They look wonderful and gorgeous. Or you can get a physical copy, which is, it actually feels a little bit like holding my journal. If you get the physical copy, you can also get the ebook for a cheaper price. So it may cost a little bit more to get them both, but it's still pretty cheap because you can get them both. I would recommend getting the physical book and then buying the ebook afterwards for like $2, because then you can have both copies and appreciate the colors, but also have it on your bookshelf. So, like I said, available on Amazon. You can buy it today, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you so much, seriously, for supporting me, for being excited about my collection and my story. I could not have done this without all of you who watch my videos. So, yeah. Water Runs Red. It's out there. It's out now.